So, Trails Through Daybreak has been out in the West for a while, ever since I started writing the script, and I and many others have absolutely fallen in love with it. It looks great, plays great, sounds great, so much of the game is just great. And as much as I would love to make it my next Trails review, A, I'm not done with it just yet, and B, I want to get one more Trails game out the door beforehand, and that game is obviously Trails to Reverie, a game that's much more similar to something like Sky Third. A game where the larger Trails narrative takes a bit of a back seat in favor of focusing more on its characters and world, along with setting up key moments and glimpses of what's to come next. So how does this game exactly hold up to the ones before it? Well, after playing it, there was definitely a lot I liked about it, but it does have some problems in the grand scheme of things. So without wasting any more time, let's get into my review of Trails to Reverie.
Starting off good and strong with my first bit of praise, I have to give them a round of applause on just how much they improved the animations for this game's graphics. Now at first, the game doesn't really look all that different from 3 or 4. Still very pretty, but very samey. But that's at a first glance. You would see that there isn't anything different. And then you realize the more you play, the more you realize to yourself, I said that twice, but I don't care, how much they improved the cutscenes in this game. Or I guess a better way to say is that the models look far better as you actually see them move around a lot more and they have, well, actual animations. You see this right off the bat with the prologue as you can see Lloyd actively moving his body around or their faces actually showing flesh moving more. From what I understand, they used motion capture this time around and it really helps the game shine. This was also the last game before they started to use Kuro's new engine, so it's very clear they wanted to go all out with a bang here. And they did. Oh boy, they did. Of course, this doesn't just translate simply to the animation. Models and several areas like the Reverie Corridor were great to look at as well. I tell you, it's a massive visual upgrade to see the Reverie Corridor from CS2 now, and then look at the one in, well, Reverie. Fantastic job, Falcom. You guys brought out the best in the engine for its final game. And that's pretty much all I have to say about graphics. So now let's get into the gameplay. Now, unlike Cold Steel 4, I actually have quite a bit to talk about in terms of gameplay. First off, I'm going to talk about my favorite addition to it, and that's the United Fronts mechanic, a set of skills that are activated by having more than 5 party members active in battle, and surprisingly enough, using the assault points to activate them. A cost I liked, as it was awesome to finally start to get more uses for the assault points other than just obtain a better advantage in battle. You can use 3 United Fronts in 3 different ways. You can launch a bunch of physical attacks, use a combined team art, or you can heal your party. Each time a United Front is used, you also obtain CP and BP points as well, which can come in a major plus when dealing with a boss fight or wanting to get through mob enemies faster. But you're probably just thinking to yourself, God, Crimson, you have such a fucking sexy voice. Wait, you're probably wondering how this works when you only have 2 assault actions. My bad. So how are they so good? Well, they improved upon the utilization of the Reverie Corridor, which I at first thought was just going to be another version of Phantasma. But I'm happy with how different it feels. At its core, it is rather similar to Phantasma. An otherworldly dungeon, running through trippy scenery while collecting orbs that give you new party members, but it's made different through 2 major factors. For one, it's a completely optional area. Outside of a few select moments, the Reverie Corridor can pretty much be ignored if you so wish. It doesn't really become a mandatory area till the post-game, which is pretty neat, as now you can just focus on the story if you really want to. Second is what you collect here. I mentioned that you collect gold orbs to correct party members. But that is not the only orb to unlock, as Reverie adds several orbs that unlock different things. Silver orbs unlock items, SEP, orbments, or even accessories or characters. Blue orbs unlock daydreams, which function similarly to the doors in Sky Third did, where you see events play out with a select set of characters. Red orbs unlock minigames like Magical Girl Elisa, a pretty fun on-rail shooter with a goofy story to match. And finally, there's the white orbs, special post-game orbs that unlock daydreams that give you hints of what you're going to be dealing with in the Calvard arc. These were my personal favorite orbs to find, as they made me genuinely excited for what's going to come up next. Just a shame that there was only 2 you can find. It would have been cool to see more of them. And finally, there's the upgrade system, where after completing certain objectives in the Reverie Corridor, you are awarded with shards that can be spent on upgrades to be used both in the Reverie Corridor and out in the field. Example is starting out with 2 assault points, but you can level it up to having 5. You can use 5 United Fronts in a row as max once you fully maxed it out. Or you can choose to level up healing areas in the Reverie Corridor for full heals. Add in more party members for more reverie corridor exploration, more bravery points, and so on and so forth. It functions a lot like doing daily quests in something like Star Rail, and adds an insane amount of optional in-game content if you wish to pursue it. Of course, the protags aren't the only one with some fancy tricks up their sleeve, as the enemies get some new stuff as well in the form of disorders. Yeah, disorders return in Reverie, but instead of being solely linked to the Ironbloods, they can now be used by several boss enemies. In addition, I loved, as the disorder system was a really cool inclusion in terms of gameplay for 4, and really needed to be utilized more in battle, so I'm very happy they took advantage of that in Reverie. All of these components come together to create a stew of super fun gameplay, to the point where I consider this the best Trails game in terms of gameplay, right up there with Daybreak. And that's pretty much it for all I have to say about the new gameplay mechanics. Felt nice to actually talk about it since 4 was pretty light on these. Not that it's a bad thing, as I stated before, I was perfectly fine with it. Just happy I got to chat about gameplay in this one a lot more. So now, let's get into the story and characters next. Now, Reverie is handled very, very differently in terms of story in comparison to the other Trails titles, where instead of following a single story, you instead follow 3 different interconnected routes. There's the Lloyd route, the Reen route, and the Sea route. The Lloyd route takes place after the game's prologue and has Crossbow finally gaining the independence it long sought after. That is until the surprise of basically everyone, Rufus comes back and takes over Crossbow again with the intention of using it as a country as a basis for uniting the world. And after thoroughly defeating the SSS, they must rally together with friends old and new in order to take back their beloved country. Meanwhile, Reed's route focuses on the main man himself learning about the mysterious being who calls himself C, following in the footsteps of Crow with nowhere near the amount of riz he did, as he brings back the United Liberation Front. And naturally, Reed wants to get to the bottom of it all. Meanwhile, you tackle probably one of the most interesting aspects in this story so far, and that's how Erebonia and its soldiers were affected by the war. Or should I say a lack of one. As Reen travels across Erebonia, he continuously comes across people who are actually upset with him that he stopped the war. Which sounds like a crazy thought in and of itself, right? Well, I actually thought so as well at first. But as the game ends up going on, they do a great job of explaining why these people are upset. These soldiers gave up everything for the sake of their country. All of the taxpayer money that they had to pay so they could make the weapons, all the training they went through, all the promises of glory of fighting for their homeland, all of that is now just in the trash, and worst of all, they're now looked at as a laughingstock afterwards. So naturally, they take their aggression out on the one person who brought this all to an end. It's such a fascinating way to look at the war ending instead of just making Reen a beloved hero who everyone's happy that he stopped all of this. And finally, you have the Sea route, where you're introduced to quite a few new characters. There's of course our frontman C, a mysterious man who is so obviously Rufus that they didn't even bother to change his standing animation in battle. Then there's Nadia and Swin, former assassins who act as couriers that just want normal lives away from killing. And finally, we have Lapis, a Rosenberg doll that was addressed to C himself. And after an awkward start, C decides to hire the former assassins to assist him in his mission. And from here, you're treated to a rather interesting group of people to follow. And while Nadia and Swin are rather interesting people, it was easily C and Lapis that stole the show for me, as those two had some of the strongest character writing throughout the game. Lapis's struggle with if she's even a real individual were incredibly endearing and allowed her bond with Rufus to really shine through. While with Rufus, they take a good hard look into what he's dealing with after the failure of Project Jorgmir and the death of his father figure Osborn. You really dive into just what makes the guy tick and how he's been affected through it all. It also helps that he starts growing as a person the longer the journey continues. But out of all of his scenes, his best has to be in the final act, where after he escapes certain death, he is told that he won't be arrested as Rufus Alberia passed away in an explosion, which makes you think he gets away scot-free, but in reality is a pretty fitting punishment, as while he doesn't go to jail, the name Rufus Alberia will never be redeemed. He's now just a man with nothing to his name. It was rather nice to see a Trails antagonist get redeemed, while at the same time, they don't really forget about all the shit they pulled like several other characters in the franchise. Alan Richard. Okay, I've been beating around the bush, so let me get into the elephant in the room. How the hell are we playing as Rufus if he's currently ruling over Crossbell again? Well, that ties into the main villain of the game known as Aslium, an artificial AI that has evolved so much he can now see into the future and is trying to guide Crossbell onto its predetermined path, which it begins by kicking Lapis, who was originally the owner of the AI, and taking over for itself, while creating a fake Rufus to be the one to lead them all. But what path could it be, talking about? What path could it be guiding people on? I mean, it's not like there's this original ending for Cold Steel 4 where we defied fate to stop it, right? And now it's just trying to push on that path. Don't be crazy. Oh, have I mentioned who the main dude you have to fight yet is? Because he looks kind of familiar. Yeah, basically the one leading this whole charge is not actually Rufus. It's what's known as Ishmaelgareen. By creating this version of Reen, it begins to assimilate into the future that we created by taking over Reen's body and creating the original ending. And naturally, we ain't gonna let that shit happen. So after banding together to charge Crossbell, witnessing Rufus's character development and one of the funniest scenes in the game,
Great timing, guy.
I leave that in your hands. Good luck.
Okay, bye.
Excuse me?
defeat fake Rufus and then learn of a super weapon that the AA created. Go and confront Ishmaelgareen there and save the day. Thing is, they were too late, as the device starts preparing to fire, but they are able to escape. All except for Rufus, who decides to stay behind and use the machine's ability to target whatever is the most hated area or thing to his advantage by broadcasting to everyone that he's been behind all the shit that's been going on, and all other sorts of crazy shit to turn everyone against him and cause the lasers to hone in on him, assuring that he will be the only one to die while taking the weapon with him. It's a very noble sacrifice that shows just how much Rufus has grown as a character throughout all of the events. And then, all the lasers hone in on him, and of course he doesn't die. And some crazy shit that I still don't understand happens, and we were able to turn back time to save him. We get to see one final moment of Ishmaelgareen say goodbye to his friends. We save Rufus. He gets the punishment I mentioned earlier. And I am at the end of the main story now. And then we just have the post-game next, where some shit starts happening in the Reverie corridor, and we have to go in to stop it. This is also where you start getting the really, really fucking strong party members, like Vita, Roselia, and Mick Byrne. Yeah, Mick Byrne becomes a party member, and he is just as strong as you think he is. And make it to the end of the Reverie corridor, where you meet this little girl who's been appearing throughout the game. She turns out to be the original Oz. You know, the models that Altina and Milliam are made off of? Yeah, you get to meet her original form. You fight a boss with probably one of the biggest health bars I've ever seen. Like, Jesus.
That's quite big. Impressive.
You beat him, save the day once again, get an orb that lets you see some hands-on stuff of what we're going to be doing in Kuro, or Daybreak as I call it now. And that's it for the game story. And is there anything else? Oh yeah, music. Music's fucking awesome, especially the mini-boss theme. I like how it's called chicken music by many, but goddamn, that soundtrack is awesome. And come on, those are totally chickens. And that's pretty much it for my pros. So how about we get into the cons?
Okay, so we went over what made Reverie so great. So what exactly does it do wrong? To be honest, not much. Reverie knows what it is and sets out to do so very, very well. But that doesn't mean its entire execution was flawless. And I think I should get into what I think was the biggest issue for me, and that is easily Lloyd's route. Lloyd probably has the single most forgettable route out of the three main characters. Not to say it's bad per se, it has its share of good, even great moments. That moment of Noel riding a motorcycle into the burning building to save him still kind of lives rent-free in my head after all. But for the most part, Lloyd's entire route is just more of the same save Crossbell stuff we've seen in earlier titles. One moment in particular sticks out as truly baffling though, and it's at St. Ursula's Hospital where Lloyd has a revelation that he's arrogantly believed him and the SSS were meant to be the ones to save Crossbell. But, when was that thought process established? Did I miss a scene in like Cold Steel 4 or something? Because I don't remember that ever being brought up. Also, this not only feels like a really out there concept for the SSS to even believe in, considering they're a lot more grounded and experienced at this point, but it also just feels way too late to introduce an idea like this. This kind of arc I do think could have worked, sure, if it had happened in some time like Azure, where they had developed some sort of hero mentality after stopping the DG cult and gaining the adoration of the public, only to then get humbled in the late game. But this is an Azure. It's Reverie. It's way past that. So this feels out of place for any of them to have that kind of mentality by now. It's a real weird part to the arc that feels like it was only there to give Lloyd something else to deal with outside of saving Crossbell again. And that isn't my only issue with the story, as I feel like Nadia and Swin's backstory could have been handled better. It's a very interesting backstory, don't get me wrong. The idea of the pair being former assassins is really cool, but my issue comes from how you learn about the backstory, as it's only introduced through 3 and 9, a book you have to read in order to understand where they come from. It's an amazing read, and I really enjoyed it, but it's kind of an issue that it comes from you can't read these books in Reverie. You can collect them in Cold Steel 4, But unless you somehow saw into the future and knew Reverie was going to be a main thing for the next game, better get ready to start reading them books online. It's weird that these just weren't made readable in Reverie. Hell, turning them into collectible daydreams also would have worked too. It isn't as big a deal as the Lloyd route stuff, but it was an annoying aspect that I couldn't help but notice. There's one more thing I should mention though, and this is more an acquired taste kind of aspect for Reverie. Reverie is a game not super focused on moving the narrative forward. It's very similar to something like Sky Third, in how it has an emphasis on its characters and preparation for future arcs. Now, I'm a big fan of when Trails decides to do this, as the world and its characters are some of my favorite parts of the entire Trails narrative. But, I won't lie, if you're not a fan of something like that, and you didn't like Sky Third, there's a very big chance you're not going to like Reverie. Other than that, there's no more story issues. So let's get into gameplay next. Now, in terms of gameplay, there aren't really a whole lot of issues. Reverie is basically the culmination of every game before it. Sure, there's still the aspect of it being a little on the easy side outside of a few boss fights, but at this point, that's a tired point to bring up. Like complaining about Muse or Angelica for the millionth time. So we're just going to go past it, focus on the real major gameplay problem, and that is the overabundance of characters. Reverie has a lot of playable characters. And on one hand, the amount of characters is really cool for party building potential, but on the other hand, due to just so many members being playable, and some just being straight up better than others, you're naturally going to be leaving a lot of characters in the dust. Because come on, are you really going to pick Elise or Eustace over fucking McBurn or Le Guin? Yeah, I didn't think so. And honestly, that's it for my cons. So let's move on to my final thoughts. So, after everything has been went over, I think it's time we ask the biggest question here. Is Trails to Reverie a satisfying epilogue? I personally say yes, it is. It has issues, but it's still a great title that is a lot of fun. And that's why my final rating for this game is a very satisfying 8.5 out of 10. That's all for this video, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw here, do me a solid and leave a like and sub down below. And maybe a comment as well to help me out with YouTube's strange algorithm. And with that, we are now finished with the first half of the Trails series. The next review shall be Daybreak, and boy am I excited to make that video. Have a good day everyone, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.